far, do you? So let's just go back to the beginning of the chapter where he set this up. Okay? He had done something to get ready for this verse. Verse 1 of chapter 13. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of the world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. His love is about to be demonstrated very practically. Verse 4, second half of the verse. He laid aside his outer garments, taking a towel, he tied it around his waist, and then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Now this is Philippians 2:3. Count others more significant than yourself. If anybody should be having his feet washed here, you know who it is. And it isn't Peter. Verse 12. When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, "Do you understand what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and your teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, a pattern, that you also should do just as I have done to you." That's verse 34. New commandment I give you, love each other as I have loved you. End of this little acted out parable, just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. Those are identical verses. So we don't have to go far to get help with what do you mean, love each other the way I loved you. I just did it. I just parabolized it for you. I acted it out. I concluded that acted out parable with the same lesson that I'm repeating now in verse 34. Verse 15 says, I give you an example that you should do just as I have done to you. And verse 34 says, just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. So, this is how we're supposed to love each other. And I see two things implied clearly in this little acted out illustration of love. Number one, it involves counting others better than yourself rather than clinging to privilege or status. Right? Jesus did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself and took the form of a servant and died for sinners. There's the pattern. And now he's living it out, acting it out by washing feet. So the first thing pastors need to hear, because we're the status people around here, right? I'm in the pulpit right now, is that my role should be manifest often with a towel around my waist, on my knees, washing your feet. Not huffing and puffing and making sure with a sense of entitlement that I be treated a certain way as the senior pastor of this church. If there's a spirit like that, it's not the Spirit of Jesus. The Spirit of Jesus goes the other direction. If anybody at that moment was Lord, if anybody right at that moment was pastor and teacher, it was Jesus Christ. And he took off his outer garment, bound himself with a towel, got down on the floor, and took the role of slave. So the first thing you say about loving one another as Jesus loved us is that nobody grabs hold of a sense of entitlement. It's a killer. And Americans are shot through with a sense of entitlement. I was listening to a sermon the other day by R.C. Sproul commenting on how he disliked the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel. And then he paused and said, and you all believe it. Really? And then he gave an illustration of how, if I remember correctly, his transmission went out on him late one night when he had an early appointment the next morning. And he grumbled to God. What kind of appointment? This is your work I'm in. And he paused and he said, that's pure entitlement. I say I don't like the health, wealth, prosperity, bless me, bless me, bless me. And as soon as something goes wrong with me, I'm in your face, God. We all are tempted to even bring to the Almighty our sense of entitlement. Things should go well for us. We should be healthy and the car should run and nobody should throw rocks through my window. So the first lesson Jesus teaches us is just let that go. That's a miracle, folks. That's a miracle. If John Piper can stop feeling a sense of entitlement, first as a human, second as an American, third as a husband, next as a father, then as a pastor, and all the benefits that go with that power, if I can get over that, what a miracle. If I could be a servant. Now the second is just the flip side of the coin. The second way that this pattern works is that when he forsook his sense of entitlement, what he did was help them with something ordinary and simple and practical. In those days, there were no paved streets, no sidewalks with nice cement, and no socks. And no closed-toed shoes, probably. I don't know for sure. And therefore, everybody's feet were caked with dirt all the time, except when somebody, either them or somebody else, washed them. And it's dirty work, smelly work, low work, slave work, and that's what he did. There's hundreds of you who serve this church in invisible, lowly, simple ways. And God is watching, and every time he sees it, that's like my son. That's like my son. And I'm pleased with my son. And therefore I'm pleased with you. So those two things, forsaking a sense of entitlement and becoming a servant, and that servanthood working its way out in just simple, practical, helping ways in people's lives. Look for ways to help people. With your mouth, with your hands, with your feet. That's the pattern. Now we turn to the second and last, power. Where am I getting this? I said the newness of the new commandment is that it is a commandment to love like Jesus, or to live out the love of Jesus, the pattern. And now I'm going to argue the newness also consists in living on the love of Jesus. Being so related to Jesus that Jesus becomes the power to love, not just the pattern to love. So where am I getting that? Because it's not readily obvious in the words, as I love you. So here's the second thing I do when I'm trying to answer a question like this. What's the newness? I'm just modeling for you so you can all become preachers or small group leaders. After I've looked at the context nearby, I get out my concordance and I try to find statements in the gospel that are as close to this statement as I can find. What's the closest parallel to this verse in all